The following program is classified G. It's suitable for all ages. We would like to remind our viewers that the views expressed in this program by our participating guests are solely viewpoints of them who take part and does not reflect the views and beliefs of the Dharana Media Network.
Good evening and thank you for joining me on this edition of Gen XYZ. Now we're back to talking about all things economics, sociology and politics on the show, especially with Sri Lanka gearing up towards the anticipated general election to be held on the 5th of August. Now this general election is something that concerns a lot of the youth in the country as well. Every year we've seen close to 1 million young voters going in and specifically swaying the vote as well. And there's a lot of things that specifically concern the youth that we'd like to feature on this show. Over the run-up to the elections, we'll be talking with a lot of candidates, policymakers and so on from across the political spectrum. And to join us today, we have the former Social Security State Minister and candidate for the SLPP from the Kegalle district, Tharaka Balasuriya. Hi Tharaka, how are you?
How are you? Not too bad.
Thank you for joining us today. I know you've been quite busy with your campaigns and so on as well. Tharaka, let's start very generally. I know you and your party have been speaking to your constituents, getting the pulse of the people, also engaging with the youth.
Yeah.
What exactly is the mechanism behind it? How have you been making sure that you really take to account the issues that seem to be resurfacing from time to time, and what have you heard so far?
Navidu, first of all, at the outset, let me thank you for having me on the show. But we are not in the process of having another manifesto out. We'll be working along the same manifesto which the President Gotabaya Rajapaksa presented. So maybe we might have to deviate it in the short run due to the coronavirus, and but the overall objective will be before the end of his term to achieve the targets which have been mentioned in the manifesto itself. As far as the campaigning goes, I think the response has been tremendous. I think it's probably for three primary reasons. One is that the UMP has been divided and there has been no alternative for the people. I think the second reason is that most of the general public have been very impressed in the manner which the President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has run the country, particularly with his simplicity and also with his efforts for reducing corruption and public waste. And I think the third fact is that people have also appreciated the manner in which the President has handled the COVID cases. So I think these three factors will culminate in a resounding victory for us.
Are there any particular concerns and so on that the youth and your constituents that you've been reaching out to have been flagging up?
Well, they are the same concerns which they had 5 years ago. Yeah. Which the primary concern is employment. And now if you look at the statistics, the Yahapalana Anduwa which came in promising about 1 million jobs, but according to the central bank, I think over 440,000 there has been a job loss from the time they came into power and by the time they left office. So we need to create a mechanism for job creation, and I think the main concern with the youth remains getting employment and having making a sustainable living.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point, and youth employment is actually something I want to touch on later on the show as well. You mentioned people were, of course, unhappy with the Yahapalana government and so on. So the vote and the mandate that President Gotabaya received back in November 2019 was, not just a vote for his policies, but also a vote against everything we've been seeing in the past. But today, the youth especially, are noticing people they wanted out of power, such as the former President Maithripala Sirisena, other politicians who might have been voted out of people running again, contesting and so on. So what would be different if people voted for you and the Pujana Peramuna this time? What exactly is different?
Well, I think it's very difficult to differentiate whether because you have one single vote, and then when you cast that vote, it's for this candidate or the other candidate, but it's not for specific reasons. So we cannot conclude that whether the people voted for the pro policies or or for the failure of the previous government. I think it's it's an accumulation of both those facts. What I feel is that the youth particularly have hope pertaining to the Gotabaya Rajapaksa, particularly he's more of a modern president, and I think I think people like who Professor Raj Somadeva has stated that Sri Lanka has a neo-feudalistic society, and I tend to agree with him because certain traditions we try to carry it forward, and they've been hindrance to the social structure. Now I think the first example I can think of is that I remember when Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa came, he started carrying his own umbrella, and I think that's a very symbolic message. Then what happened was all the politicians followed, and then they started carrying the umbrella. So it's you have to start with the leadership, and you have to start with little things, and those things will filter down. He then started reducing his reducing the number of his vehicles, and also his staff numbers, and then and also like when he travels from A to B, you don't clear the roads and all that. He travels at the same pace as ordinary citizens travel. So that gives an impression that he's more of a modern president. We hear stories that like New Zealand Prime Minister waiting in the queue in order to get into the plane. So and so we haven't seen that kind of a structural change over here, and I think what the president is concerned is that we need to make some sort of a revolutionary change pertaining to some of the social structures which we have inherited, and which are to a certain degree neo-feudalistic. I mean, let's say for example, when politicians walk into a funeral house or something like that, then everybody stands up, and then I'm like, why do you stand up? Okay, sometimes a politician might be very scrupulous politicians who have made tremendous amount of money, but everybody stands up. Now I think even in US you don't use the word honorable. So now in a lot of countries you don't use the word honorable or something, but in Sri Lanka we have had a culture of making politicians bigger than what they are, so I think we need to look at it from a perspective that it's just a job, okay, and then you're there for a certain period of time. So you just do the best job you can, and then you get out and then move on with your life. So the perspective change is being inculcated by Gotabaya Rajapaksa, and I think the general public are very appreciative of it.
Yeah, that's actually a very interesting point on how certain things embedded in our culture, putting people up on pedestals, the way we judge the character of a person needs to change. But there's a lot of valuable historical traditions and so on. It's not the same as removing all of those traditions either. It's basically achieving the balance.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm not against tradition or whatever. I think we need to have an identity of who we are, and if we don't know where we are coming from, we certainly wouldn't know where we are going. So we certainly need to have an identity of where we are. But certain things needs to change also.
On with the times.
On with the times,
Exactly.
And I think a good example is like when you have a meeting or something. Now, since I'm going for about 20-30 meetings a day, the particular seat that the candidate sits is, you know, maybe a larger, you know, seat or sofa or something like that. But why do you need to do that? So even before you give a speech, that the people themselves have, you know, elevated that person to a higher level. So I think we need to maybe adapt, you know, certain things like from the Japanese culture. Whatever the job what you are doing, you know, it's not so much a job what you do, but it's how you do it and the honor in it, which should be respected.
Tharaka, a quick question. So you mentioned that the president is leading by example essentially, and hoping this would trickle down onto the wider governing bodies in Sri Lanka and so on. And a lot of a big topic that the youth especially have been concerned about is what exactly do we mean by, you know, making sure we elect, you know, capable, smart, you know, men and women into the parliament.
Yeah.
Now you happen to satisfy both conditions of, you know, being an educated member of parliament, whatever that means. You have a master's and a degree from both USA and the UK. There's also the element of being a responsible member of parliament. Now in your case, for instance, your attendance over the last session of the parliament has been well over 80%. But we see, you know, prime ministers of subsequent governments even, you know, having their attendance waning over time. Now, what do you think about, you know, is it right to have criteria, for instance, on who can be eligible to get into parliament? Is it, you know, is it the right thing to do to restrict candidates based on education levels, or is there a better way of doing this? How do we, because clearly over time the rhetoric of saying, right, you know, if you don't like someone, simply don't elect them, doesn't seem to be working, because we are dealing with a relatively small pot of candidates.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on this?
Interesting question. I am against any interference in the election of candidates by bringing in rules saying that, you know, you need to have a degree, or you need to have certain qualifications. That for me, what I would view as it's, you know, anti-democratic. You know, it's people should choose their candidates, and I don't think, you know, having, let's say, you know, 225 professors in parliament would also meet the people's the criteria. So you need to have, you know, mixture of people. You need to have people who might not have any educations but who have lots of life experience, and then they can certainly contribute at the very top. And you might need to have some, you know, legal people who would be helpful in drafting policies or drafting rather legislation. So I think you need to have, you know, a mixture of people in parliament, and you need to have the youth in parliament, and then you need to have I think some seniors also. Now it's interesting that you categorize me as a youthful member when I'm 47 years old. So I think in Sri Lankan context you are youthful, but, you know, you possibly cannot call somebody who's, you know 47 years old youth. So that itself goes to show that, you know, the youth have not been properly represented in parliament.
Yeah, I think it's time for a short commercial break, but when we are back, let's talk on that further, and also discuss youth unemployment, the education system and so on. Let's be back after a short commercial break. This is Gen XYZ. Welcome back to Gen XYZ. We are joined by Tharaka Balasuriya, former State Minister for Social Security and a candidate from the SLPP. We were talking about what makes a suitable candidate, what makes the ideal member of parliament, Tharaka. And let's use you as an example. I've seen your answer to this sort of question before. What exactly do you consider, you know, your milestone achievements? How exactly do you monitor if an elected MP is doing the right thing? Because so far a lot of people seem to talk about tangible, physical outcomes.
Yeah.
This person did this or built this, his name is on this, and so on.
Yeah.
Do you agree that that's the best way to, that's the role of the perfect MP?
The role of an MP, it's multidimensional and it changes from country to country. But from a Sri Lankan concept, I think it certainly. If a MP can contribute the part of the what you address as building things or roads and all that is also a necessity, but I think politicians do that more out of trying to put their face on that the billboard which advertise what they have done. But also you need to contribute in parliaments such as like in the committee meetings and which most of the people are not aware what their representatives are doing. So I was one of the people who advocated for the televising the committee meetings, and then I was also in one of the speakers advisory committee groups. So I've been working with in the other groups in parliament saying that we need to televise that, and now as a result of that, I think the COP meetings are being televised. But also I think from a Sri Lankan context that the people do expect your representative to be close to you. So there is an element where you need to visit the constituents and then keep in touch with them, and then maybe on a from a name basis you need to be in contact with them, and you need to go to their funerals, you need to go to their weddings, and then
But you've also been a politician who always looks at the bigger picture. So I'm sure this also means sometimes the simple asks that individual people in your constituents request from you might actually not be in the best interest of wider society. Do you encounter situations like that?
Well, I mean, I don't think it's mutually exclusive. So you can look at the the macro picture, and then you can also look at the bigger picture. So I think you can do both. It's very time consuming.
Yeah.
So it will be very nice that if we have a parliamentary system where we entirely look at the legislative aspect of it. But I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon.
Right, Tharaka. So moving on to youth unemployment.
Yeah.
Statistics show that youth between the age of 18 to 25, especially in Sri Lanka, have an unemployment rate of 25%.
Yeah.
Now, President Gotabaya recently announced that he has plans to upskill over 500,000 graduates, if I'm not mistaken, who are currently looking for jobs. Yeah. He wants to train them in vocational, technical training, and so on. The president has currently criticized the current education system, saying that we don't focus on skills that the job market actually needs. It's very theoretical and so on. Now, is there an impact thanks to the coronavirus on this as well, or if not, how will you and the Position Peramuna government, if elected, take this forward? Well,
of course the COVID virus will transform the way we work, and then the way we communicate, and the way we interact. Certainly, let's say now there will be more opportunities which will be explored, such as work from home, which I think would do well for especially the female population. We have 52% female population, and the most educated people in Sri Lanka tend to be the females. But there is also a bigger problem which the president had addressed, which lies with our education system. We keep producing we keep producing our arts graduates who are not oriented for the job market. So I think we need to streamline our education system in line with the job market. But the number of intake of art graduates has declined over the years, but it still tends to be a very high portion. So I think we need to have some structural changes there, and then we also need to look at areas such as information technology. Now, in information technology, let's say if you want to be a web developer or whatever, you might not need to spend 4 years doing a college degree. But let's say you can have a HTML or CSS class, and then you have intense class for 6 months, and then you give them that specific training, and then then you'll be able to find a job. And most this computer, the gurus and the big people have not had a university-based education, but more of a self-educated themselves. So I think that's why, and information technology is also one area which we should also certainly focus in, because within the next, I think, well, we are at the beginning of a fourth industrial revolution, and maybe the next 100 years it will be all information technology. And
Tharaka, so to address this issue of giving people just the right level of education that the market needs and so on, especially people my age see the importance of private universities. Non-government bodies that award degrees and diplomas and so on, of course, to the right standard. Now, a very good example is the issue of SITEM we've seen in the past, where a lot of youth, really talented youth, who just miss the opportunity to go to local university by a few percentage points perhaps, but don't have the funding or financial background to afford going abroad. Still very driven individuals who have all the criteria it takes to become a doctor, for instance. They were hopeful that the government will be on their side around the time of the SITEM controversy, but we've continuously seen governments bowing down and letting private institutions rather not be given the opportunity to expand in the country. Sri Lanka would also potentially be a very fantastic location to bring in international students coming in as well. We've seen the global shift in people flying to Western countries to study. We see students from UK and the US traveling to Hong Kong, for instance, reversing of roles there. Is there any guarantee that the SLPP can give to actually support boosting the presence of educational institutes in Sri Lanka?
It depends on how you define boosting. If boosting means increasing in the numbers, I don't know, because we should increase the numbers, but we need to keep the quality of the education system. Now, if you look at the number of, India has probably the most number of universities in the world or something. You have some universities with 50 students. Okay, so now do we want to become another India? No, we don't. But do we want to say bring in some prestigious private universities into Sri Lanka? Now, I think that in like INSEAD has a college in Malaysia. A lot of, I think, Harvard and some of the top universities have colleges in branches in Malaysia and some in Singapore, I believe. So
in Singapore as well.
So that sort of a system is absolutely okay. And then we are also very mindful that we need to have free education and freedom of education also. So I think everybody should have the right for free education. But then let's say if somebody wants to educate themselves in a different manner, or let's say should have the freedom to educate themselves in a let's say a private university if they so desire. I myself went to a private school. I went to overseas university, so I wouldn't oppose anybody else going to overseas university or going to a private school. But I think pertaining to the question pertaining to SITEM, it's just that I think it's not all the students which were, I might be wrong, but all the students which were not taken when not once, just they failed to get into the local universities. If that was the case, I don't think there would be an issue. Some students, what has been reported was some students who have failed the A levels also have got into the SITEM. Or with 3 S's or very simple passes or something like that. So you have to have some social justice also. Just because you have money, it doesn't give you a right to, and if you don't have some sort of a intellectual capacity to become a doctor, so just because you have money, it doesn't give you a right to go somewhere and then get a qualification and say you are a doctor. So I think we need to keep the standards pertaining to education.
Right, Tharaka. It's time for another commercial break, and that's actually a very interesting conversation there, especially around the topic of upskilling graduates and so on, rather than purely giving them jobs, because a lot of the criticism is that Sri Lankan's unemployment rate is around 4%, which is actually considered frictional. You don't want to create a situation where people are just given odd jobs for the sake of giving a job, earning a very mediocre salary that cannot sustain a family to begin with. On that note, let's take a short commercial break. Once we're back, let's talk about social equity and legislative changes, some of the areas which Tharaka has also championed during his time as State Minister. Stay tuned for Gen XYZ. We'll be back very soon. Welcome back to this episode of Gen XYZ, where we are joined by former State Minister for Social Security, Tharaka Balasuriya. We were just talking about educational reforms in Sri Lanka and what people could expect from a potential Podujana Peramuna government, which is what Tharaka is contesting under. Tharaka, moving on to social justice and legislative changes and so on. Now, this is something a lot of young people take very seriously. There's also been the influence of a lot of things we've seen on the news recently, such as the murder of George Floyd. Sri Lanka has historically always been on the forefront of bringing women to the front, but then there's a question of, okay, do we still hold on to achievements in the past, such as having the first female prime minister, or do we see that rippling down in the present as well? Now, during your time as a state minister, you proposed an amendment to the Companies Act in Parliament, for instance, which made it mandatory to have a certain amount of female representation in the director board of a company. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
It was actually not during my time as a minister, it was my time as an MP.
Right.
Once you become a minister, you can't bring private members' bills. Well, for starters, I think if we can reduce the process if you can make it easier for members to bring in private members' bills, then I think the Parliament will function more efficiently. Because it's a long process. But what I tried to do was that bring in legislation which to make it mandatory for that 1/3 representation of women on all boards across the country, not just public boards but also private boards. But then I was advised by the AG's department that it might be against the constitution or something to that effect, then so we had to change wording from mandatory to where we encourage to 1/3 women representation. So what we see is that in Sri Lanka, not only in politics but also even in the business sector, that there's very little women representation at the very top. So some affirmative action, I think, is necessary in order to encourage women to the forefront.
Absolutely. Tharaka, that's a very top-down approach though, right?
Yeah.
This is prescriptive, saying we suggest there is X amount of women in a board and so on.
Yeah.
Don't you think there might also be a couple of other grassroots level issues, taking a bottom-up approach, which shows why we might not have women in the pipeline climbing up the ladder to take in the lead?
I think you need to take a more of a top-down approach over here. The example which you cited as Mrs. Bandaranaike being the first female, world's first woman prime minister. Yeah. I think it's more to do with the as I mentioned earlier, the neo-feudalistic nature of our society. I mean, not to take anything away from her. The husband dies, there's a sympathy vote, and then you vote for Mrs. Bandaranaike. It's not like Mrs. Bandaranaike in her own merit actively was engaged in politics, and then she rose to the top. Not to take anything away from what she did. So let's say if you look at the local council elections, then I think they were a success by introducing women into the local councils, and they're functioning very well. So I think because there are certain social barriers which which discourage women from entering politics, that you have to take a top-down approach, and then you have to make certain laws that make it easy for the women to come up. So I would think that the barriers are more traditional and historical things which we continue to carry forward.
Mm-hmm. Right. So we see the need of a mindset change almost.
Of course.
Here. Yeah. And so another question, speaking of mindset change, is something that President Rajapaksa has also been talking about. We saw him visit Verahara, for instance, to the Department of Motor Vehicles.
Yeah.
We saw him visit the Velikada prisons.
Yeah.
He essentially carried out almost a current state assessment, seeing how exactly things work there, and he was solutionizing on the spot, encouraging state workers there really to step up the game, remember that they are providing a service to the taxpayers and so on.
Yeah.
Now this has been received in two ways, as with anything political really. Some people were really inspired by this, saw a change in efficiency, while others might have said, oh, is this a publicity stunt and so on. But now the question is, how do we make sure the kind of work that President himself is directly getting involved in ripples through and stays consistent? Because you possibly can't have the president of the country, for instance, individually, personally visiting every single department and prescribing what needs to be done and so on.
Yeah.
How would electing a particular party at the general elections, because most of the contestants aren't brand new people either, right? How do you ensure that the good work of wanting a mindset change basically by the president ripples through? What do we expect there? Do we really need a two-third majority as well in order to accomplish this?
We need a two-third majority for for constitutional reforms, but what we have is more of a hierarchical system where where you have the minister, then you have the secretaries, and then you have whatever your departments and all those things. Mm-hmm. But we can adopt a more of a metric system. Let's say, for example, what President is President is very concerned about systems and processes. So that's what he went to Verahara to check what systems and processes they have. Mm-hmm. And I understand that they had a very good they still have a very good IT system over there where they have this letter recognition and all that. It's done by Metropolitan. But we can also have more of a metric system where you have the hierarchical things which are going down. But then let's say you have the ICTA department, so that what the ICTA departments can be across the line, so they can get involved in the Ministry of Finance, from Ministry of to Labour to Ministry of Health and all that, and then develop a system across the board. So a similar mechanism will be adopted by I believe by the president, so that all areas can be addressed.
You mentioned technology advances, the RMB having good technology already, and the president has also been keen on leveraging the changes that COVID-19 brought about. For instance, at the present moment, you don't need to physically go there to get a driver's medical test. Yeah. You have a select few hospitals that provide this, and then electronically transmit your data. And we've seen a lot of conversation about the need for a national database, for instance, that links all agencies.
Yeah.
Now, this also ideally should bring about a lot of cross-ministerial cooperation and so on, so that there isn't redundancy of work being done in one place, needing to be repeated somewhere else. But are there any challenges with this? Because as far as I understand, then comes the issue of funding, where right now funding is prioritized. It's given to one particular ministry or government agency or organization at a time.
Yeah.
Is this something you think is part of the constitutional reforms you keep mentioning as well, Tharaka?
No, the constitutional reforms which I was mainly referring to was pertaining to the 19th Amendment, and then it has weakened the state. Mm-hmm. So we need to rectify that. But as far as having a common platform, now I was fortunate enough to go to Estonia, and then they have a fantastic IT structure there. there. So they took us to the cabinet, the ministerial room, and then they said their cabinet meetings get done in 5 minutes. Because before the cabinet starts, all the cabinet papers are sent, and then they work on from home, and then they say whether they agree or they disagree or needs to be discussed. So what the Prime Minister does usually is take the subjects, things which they all agree on. So then if you all agree on 5 things, then you can finish the meeting quickly. And then what needs to be discussed, maybe they'll discuss at a later stage, or so they adopt a similar system. But also I forget the name of the system which they use, but more importantly, it's that the data which you have. Let's say if you go for the national ID, if NIC, then you don't need to go for the passport. The same information can be used, and from the passport, the same information can be used for the driver's license. So you don't need to keep filling forms and all those things. So,
but Tharaka, before we go into a quick break. For this to be done on a national level, right? The adoption rates of such technology, internet, and so on needs to be quite high. How far is Sri Lanka in terms of being penetrated with technology, especially in regions like Kegalle, for instance, which you are representing?
It's fairly high. I think now if you look at the number of internet users, it has increased exponentially over the last 5 years. So I think most of the youth will be involved with the technology, and then we also need to think of the future when we make policies. We can't be thinking of the present levels at the moment. So what will people do in 5 years or 10 years time? We need to be thinking of that, and we need to make policy decisions based on that, not necessarily how many people are using internet right now.
Right, Tharaka, thank you. We'll be taking a short commercial break now. Once we are back, let's touch a little bit on Tharaka's approach to getting things done in Sri Lanka, what the blockers might be, and also briefly touch on what impact, if at all, COVID-19 might have on President Gotabaya's manifesto, and how things might look different going forward. Welcome back to this episode of Gen XYZ, where I'm joined by Tharaka Balasuriya, former State Minister for the Ministry of Social Security and a current contestant from the Kegalle district under the SLPP. We've been talking about a lot of areas of concern that affect the youth of this country. We've mentioned the education system, gender equality, constitutional reforms, and so on. And now I just want to touch on, Tharaka, how you balance your view of government versus social freedoms and so on. That's another main topic, especially the youth is concerned with, seeing how things have been, how culture has essentially evolved over the past few decades.
Yeah.
Now, you tend to be generally very progressive. You recognize the role of government, but is also quite socially liberal. Now, youth are furious for most part over how, despite us having a vibrant democracy and so on for so many years, a lot of our key legislature, especially when coming to the social side of things, has been very colonial. Even with dealing with the COVID-19 situation, for instance, we realize, the main piece of legislature behind it was a quarantine law that's, obviously very outdated, and now it's time for change. If you take a look at the alcohol ban, for instance, President Rajapaksa ensured this was lifted during Christmas time because, you look at that demographic that celebrates Christmas to begin with. Alcohol is a very key part of that, but you still don't see that being lifted when it comes to Poya holidays, for instance. You talk of individual identities. Now, you were actually one of the few or only state ministers to have openly discussed the issue of recognizing LGBTQ people, for instance, on a public forum. But in the president's election, we saw neither of the two main parties actually even recognize this issue. It was only Anura Kumara Disanayaka who mentioned such recognition in a speech. But the youth of the country especially has a preset mindset that it's the UNP, for instance, that do cater to all of these people. But if you look at the track record of what actions have been taken, there is little to talk about. Is this all talk and no action, or do you think it's not the right time to address a lot of these colonial legislation that we've been inheriting for the past few decades from the British?
No, I think again, these are not mutually exclusive things. When if you do one thing, it doesn't mean you need to exclude the other things at all. Yeah, you can do both together. My perspective has always been that I see that any interaction between two people, if there's no negative externality to the society, should be interaction between those two people, and the government should not be getting involved in their whatever the freedoms which they have. And I feel that people have unalienable rights, which that even a government cannot take away from. So I will always stand up for those the rights of the individuals. And then I think there's a lot of MPs. There's a lot of MPs who are with the same view that I share, and but maybe because of certain political dimensions, they might not want to be very expressive about it. I mean, certainly politicians like Vasudeva Nanayakara and especially the left-oriented politicians has been very liberal in their views about LGBT rights, and not only LGBT rights, but any let's say what I do in my house should not be the business of the government, as long as what I do in my house does not have any negative externality to the society. So I think certainly we need to move forward with the times, and I know there are a lot of the social pressures, and then people who will act up saying that because if this is done, this is going to happen, and this is going to happen. But then also the President Gotabaya Rajapaksa talks of one law. Then if there's one law, that one law should apply to let's say the LGBT society also. Yeah, so it doesn't mean that they should be excluded from a certain opportunity because of their sexual orientations.
Right.
So I believe that everybody should have equal rights.
Tharaka, touching on to your very libertarian viewpoints and so on, another thing I've come to know is your way of working has been to ease the burden of public funds, taxpayer money and so on. You strongly believe in the need for a lot of public-private partnerships. One example is the work you've done with the Samruddhi initiative, where you've connected grassroots level cultivators, carpenters, plumbers and so on, who might not have had an online presence with the online consumer kind of market by working together with Daras. In terms of producers and so on, I know you've been in touch with Cargills, Keels and so on to try to figure out exactly what the market needs. And there was also a focus on making sure the logo of the Samruddhi initiative, for instance, appears on all these products, so people know they're directly supporting a particular low-income family. Can you tell us a little bit more about what your philosophy is in terms of working with such initiatives? Well,
the basic philosophy is that we have 1.5 million Samruddhi holder families, and we give them the maximum of 3,500 rupees per day. And you don't hear of a person coming out of poverty by giving 3,500 rupees a month. Yeah, so one initiative the president has taken is that if you can give them a job, then with the 100,000 low-income jobs, then you make a salary of about 30 to 40,000 rupees, and then there is hope that they might be able to come out of poverty. But obviously we can't give 1.9 million jobs to all the power-stricken people. So one way of overcoming this is that we want to develop this concept of cluster villages, of 1,000 cluster villages across the country. A cluster village is defined by you grouping a few villages together, and then then you either grow something, or you produce something, and then you or you provide a certain service. Let's say in an area like like where there is tourism. So we have signed up with like Cargills and then also Keels, and then we also have signed up with the Agricultural Ministry. So now I had a discussion with both the Minister Chamal Rajapaksa and also Minister Ramesh Patirana. So what we don't see, but what I see is that we don't need to work in different ministries in isolation. We all of us needs to get together and then and reach the end objective. So let's take if we now in for example in Ruanwala there's an area called Amitiragala, and then it's quite popular for pineapple. So then both the Minister of Agriculture and then the Samurdhi can come together. The Ministry of Agriculture can give the technical know-how of how to grow the pineapple, and then we can give the money to those people. And then also we need to the hindrance for these cottage industries is to develop is the market. So we need to find new ways of reaching the market. And as I said before, like that we believe that the online marketing is the way to the future. Maybe it will improve drastically more in 5 or 10 years time. So we need to put the stepping stones right now.
Right.
And also another thing which we are looking at is that from a marketing angle is we need to popularize the name of the village which certain thing is produced. Let's say if you look at
make a particular village very well known for exactly that particular unique
product. So you can only popularize it if the product is a good product.
Yes.
So you have like Dijon mustard, but then Dijon mustard is the best mustard in the world or something. Yeah. So similarly,
very pragmatic point of view there, Tharaka. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. But really nice speaking of your philosophy and ways of working. Good to get a flavor of what we see going forward. I know you're very busy with your campaign work, and it's your daughter's birthday today as well. So thank you very much for taking the time off to join us. We'll be back again next week with another episode of Gen XYZ. We'll be following the story on the run-up to the general elections. We hope to see more representation from across parties and political spectrums to really ask the questions the youth of this country have in mind. This is Gen XYZ. We'll see you next week.